Hello there, this is Linda Schiller Hanna, Inner Kid Keto, Volume 97. I have been doing videos for several months now. And the reason I do it is because when I lost a substantial amount of weight, over 40 pounds with a keto food plan, what emerged from beneath those layers of extra fat were feelings. And so in an effort to unpack my feelings and to stay clean and clear in my recovery from food addiction, I've engaged you, I've invited you to come along on the ride as you're working through your food addiction, your food feelings, your unfinished business. I am approaching this from a variety of angles, from an emotional, from the spiritual, from the practical, from the inner child, from the psychological, just little stories along the way. If you watch my series, because I do something pretty much every day, you'll see that I kind of ping around in a variety of ways. And sometimes I imply this or say that with clarity, sometimes hinting, sometimes on the nose, direct. Today is an on-the-nose direct story, and it's based on truth. The reality is that the traumatic childhood I had growing up in the 50s and 60s in Pacific Northwest was pretty challenging. There was pretty significant child abuse, pretty significant neglect, not enough to eat, not enough safety, not enough protection. And all of that piled up on me to give me a sense of, I'm on my own here. Some of you are nodding. You can relate to, I'm on my own here. Despite that, I have high intelligence, high empathic capacities, high sensitivity. I had open heart surgery at 5, one of the first in the world for my particular condition. I had a heart murmur. And in 1954, I was one of the first in the world in the Children's Orthopedic in Seattle by Dr. Crystal. It's still in medical books. So I've had a lot of unusually stressful early life experiences. What that did was open up my intuition, my survival mechanism, my psychic ability, off the charts, because I didn't have normal sense of safety in a normal, healthy home. Again, many of you are nodding. Oh, I can relate to that. Yes, I had to have connection to higher power, connection to guides and angels, connection to my own inner voice. In my late 20s, I began to really focus on that part of my life, my intuitive part. And I read a book. One of them was Anne Faraday's book about dreams. I can't remember the title offhand. I'll tell you if it comes to me. But she said 50% of all dreams come true. And that blew me away. And I read another book by Joanne Chase, You Can Through Psychic Power. Also very, very helpful. Between those two books, one of the things it said was that this woman read the Bible every day. Well, actually, Edgar Cayce read the Bible every day. That's right. I thought I knew about Edgar Cayce, America's greatest psychic, and said he read the Bible every day. And so with the desire to be more psychic, to have more control, I started reading the Bible every day. And that's when the book Dream Power came into my life. That's the title, Dream Power. And it said in the first chapter, half of all dreams come true. Okay, I'm finally getting to the sequence now. In the news, the very next day that I made that decision to start recording dreams, they started talking about Skylab. I found this book yesterday, which was a triggering point for me to say, time to talk about this part of my story. This book Shows a picture of Skylab right here. And it says right here, Space Laboratory. On May 14th, 1973, the United States launched its first space station, Skylab. Experiments included research into weightlessness and the effects of long-term space travel on the human body. Between 1973 and 1974, 9 astronauts traveled to and from this station in Apollo capsules. The empty Skylab re-entered our atmosphere and disintegrated on July 11th, 1979. So that's right in this book on space. And I found this book yesterday. And I said, that's triggering. That's a message. Pay attention. Time to tell this story. So it was on the news. Skylab's going to fall back to Earth, and we don't know where. It's probably going to break up in pieces. It's 9 tons of space junk, and it could land on someone's head. And because I came from a dysfunctional family where I always thought everything happened to me like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. I went to sleep that very first night after deciding I would start paying attention to dreams. And I wrote down my dream. And in my dream, Skylab fell in Perth, Australia, and pieces of it landed on a tall building. And in the dream, my mother was wearing an International Orange Highway Worker vest, which to me was a symbol of danger. There were some hills out in the distance. Me and my mother and my brother, and I think my sister too, I don't know, we were in this tall building in Perth, and Skylab broke up and hit the tall building. I wrote it all down. This was December 78. It was an article, it was in the San Francisco Chronicle, and that's how I know, because I was living in the Bay Area. Well, months go by, and we're getting into late June, and it's back on the news. Skylab's going to fall to Earth any day, and no one knows where. And I remembered that dream, and I looked it up in my journal, and sure enough, there were those details. And I thought, what if this is accurate? Would I want to know if it was going to hit a tall building and I was in Perth? I thought, well, no one knows me in Perth anyway. If I'm wrong, so what? I can't lose faith. This was before fax. This was before internet. This was years ago, folks. So I go to the Vallejo Public Library. I asked the librarian in the research department to look up the name of the newspaper in Perth, Australia. And I got the phone number because it was in one of those reference books. And I called at my own expense. I was a secretary at the time. And I called the Perth newspaper and asked to speak to the editor. And I said, I am Linda Schiller Hanna. Well, actually, back then I was only Linda Schiller. I've had a couple of random dreams come true, a couple of random hits. One was about a friend who was out to sea and thinking of me, and he validated. I had a couple little random hits, but nothing this big. And he interviewed me over the phone. And I said, I will mail you my prediction. And I mailed it because this was before internet, any of that stuff. And I sent a picture of myself. Well, lo and behold, we are getting into July, I think 6th or 7th. And now it's on the news. I'm at work. They've got the radio on. Skylab's heading for Perth. Skylab is breaking up over the Indian Ocean, heading straight for Perth. And I put my head down on my desk. I was a secretary, and I prayed. I said, God, I want to be right, but I don't want to be that right. I don't want people to be hurt because of I had this vision. And I suspect some people in Perth were praying too. So this is the letter I got back. Here's the article first in the newspaper. Skylab, debris drops in desert. The return of Skylab. And here's the letter I got from the West Australian newspaper from Dear Miss Linda Schiller, August 7th, 1979. It was very kind of you to telephone the West Australian and warn that Skylab could be an unwanted visitor here. In terms of space travel, you were uncomfortably close to the mark. You will see from the attached clippings that we published a story about you only a day before Skylab came hurtling down in the southeast of Western Australia, some of it less than 400 miles from Perth. But as you know, nobody was hurt and there was no harm done. Indeed, Western Australia, celebrating the 150th anniversary of white settlement in its part of the world, was glad to have the international publicity that Skylab brought with it. It even outpointed the Miss Universe contest, which was on at the time in Perth. I thoroughly enjoyed reading your letter about your dream. Thank you, too, for the picture of you. Best wishes, Malcolm C. Urin, editor. So the letter and all of that is on my website. You can see it for yourself with other details, lightworker22.com. Okay, so what happened after that happened is I thought, wow, I've got some ability here and I don't know what to do with it. I don't have any control. Later, I was working in a clothing store on Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley. And one of the customers said, do you ever have psychic experiences? And I said, yeah, I do. And she says, me too. She said, I was a little girl. Our family was at Disneyland. And I said to my parents, are there ever fires at Disneyland? And everyone said, oh, no. And later that day, there was a fire at Disneyland and everybody had to leave the park. So she validated her thing, and I told her about Skylab. And she said, did you know that 2 blocks from here, from this store, is a psychic development school called Heart Song? And I said, no. She told me about it. I went and enrolled and took a 9-month course on how to turn it on and off on demand. It's basically a meditation thing. You go into an alpha state. I tested myself with my brain waves with brain equipment. We go into alpha when we pray. We go into alpha when we drive on the freeway. We go into alpha when we're doing routine things like sorting socks. We go into alpha when we chant. All these, when we are dreaming, that's why half of all dreams come true. Even watching TV, that's why commercials are so expensive, because we're in a state of semi-hypnosis, alpha. And we're going, buy Campbell's soup. I'll buy Campbell's soup. We've been brain dirted, I call it, to follow those commercials because we're in an alpha state. We're half in hypnosis when we're watching TVs and movies. And that's why they pay so much for those commercials, because we really get triggered into following those ads. All right, so what has this got to do with Inner Kid Keto? What I do for a living, what I have done since 1980 when I graduated from Heart Song. So 1980 to 2025, 45 years, I've been a professional intuitive. At first I started part-time, but eventually I've done it full-time as my full career. If you want to have a reading with me, go to lightworker22.com, look up my number and call me or email me, text me, and we'll get you in my schedule. Usually about 80 to 90% accurate, not 100%. Nobody's 100%. If you want to have consulting with my intuition, with my spirit guides, about how to help you recover from your pain, from your trauma, from your childhood, because it's my specialty, and because I have spiritual help, I may be able to help you get over some of those hurdles quicker than you might find with any other kind of counseling. I have little Linda here, and I have her wearing this little thing with stars. Reach for the stars. I learned to reach for the stars. Since I started this life as an intuitive counselor, psychic counselor, I've had my own TV series in LA on public access, The Natural Psychic. We did 21 shows. I've done drive time dream interpretation on Cleveland radio. I had a show with Kim McBride in Canton about intuition for several weeks on Saturdays. I've been a guest on many different radio programs and TV specials. I have helped find missing children. I have helped solve crimes. I've read thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I also founded a nonprofit, Angel Love Healing Center, where I've done free counseling for people with HIV and AIDS, which is how I got to know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, because we were both doing that work at the same time. I picked up training as a Reiki master. I'm just kind of giving you my bio. Maybe hearing some of this will help you feel more connected from now on, or maybe you'll go back to some of my earlier programs between 1 and 96, and maybe you'll have a little more confidence in some of the things I've shared, because every single one of them was guided by spirit. They say, talk about this today, talk about this today, talk about this tomorrow. Follow spirit without question. All right, that's probably enough what do they call it? Self-publicity, self-aggrandizement. I don't want to share this as a brag. I want to share this as a gift. I have been given this gift. It is a gift. And there are people who will say, well, if it's a gift, why do you charge? Because I still have to make house payments, phone payments, car payments, just like everybody else. And I find that when I give it away, people don't value it. They just don't. One of my friends, Mary Roach, who's one of the most gifted readers on the planet, who's also an ARE psychic, said she had a next door neighbor, and Mary would give her free readings. And the woman went to somebody else and said, well, did you ask Mary about this problem you're having? And she says, oh, she's just my crazy neighbor. She wouldn't honor it because she was next door and free. We both learned the labor is worthy of his hire. The doctor gets paid, the minister gets paid, the highway worker gets paid, the McDonald's worker gets paid. We get paid too. I do have a sliding scale for those who need it. I work for free with missing children. I work for free with the police. I work for free for suicidal teens. I work for free for women who are in domestic violence and trying to get out, because I was in domestic violence. I'm going to do a whole program on suicide very soon, because that hit my family really hard too one time. So I do tithe. I do give away 10% of what I work. Okay. Go ahead and look up Skylab on the internet. Find out about the history of America's space program. I did meet a NASA scientist a few years after this happened. And I told him about my Skylab thing. And he looked at me and he said, we had no idea where it was coming down. We really didn't know. I didn't know, but my higher power knew. And I was able to ask, listen, receive, communicate, and get validation. Millions of people get intuitive hits, but if you don't put it out there, if you don't communicate it, if you don't get validated, it can sometimes feel like a waste. Follow your intuition, follow your spirit without question. But I worked very hard to develop my professional skills, and I'm not ashamed of it. All right. Inner Kid Keto signing off for today. God bless you. Segment 97, over and out. And reach for the stars, folks. Reach for the stars. Do you.